The great hall at Aldemira had gone so still that Clara could hear the rain ticking against the high windows. The man in the brown coat held the pistol level. His hand shook, but not enough to comfort anyone. 6 feet of black and white marble lay between the muzzle and the Duke of Hartwell, and the Duke had not moved. He stood with a glass of untouched claret in one scarred hand, the firelight catching the old white scar that split his left eyebrow, and he looked at the desperate man the way another man might look at weather. "You let them starve," the gunman said. His voice cracked down the middle. "Sergeant's widow. The Hartwell Company. You signed the fund into being, and then you let them rot. And I have written you 11 times, Your Grace. And you have never once—" "I have never seen a letter," the Duke said quietly. Liar, the footman by the door had frozen. Mr. Ferris, the man of business, stood half behind a pillar with his keys still in his hand, his face the color of tallow. Every armed man in that room, the 2 footmen, the Duke's own valet edging toward the fire irons, stood still. And then the maid stepped forward. Clara did not decide to do it. Afterward, she could never reconstruct the thought, because there had been none. There had only been the muzzle, and the Duke's unmoved face, and her own feet carrying her off the wall, where maids were meant to stand invisible, across the open floor, into the 6 feet of marble, until she was a body between the gun and the man it wanted. "Sergeant Dunmore," she said, "you don't want to do this in front of the staff." The pistol jerked toward her. "Get out of the way, girl, no." Her hand had risen to her throat without her leave, closing around the small brass button that hung there on a frayed blue ribbon. "You came for justice. You'll not get it by hanging for a housemaid's murder." Behind her, she heard the Duke set down his glass at last. A small click of crystal on wood. Very loud. "I knew you'd come," he said. For one wild instant Clara thought he meant her. Then she understood he was speaking to the room, to the months of unsigned warnings that had been slipped beneath his study door, to the inevitability that had finally walked through his front entrance with a gun. But his eyes, when she risked a glance back, were not on Dunmore. They were on her hand, on the button. It was Clara who got the pistol lowered, and she did it with arithmetic. "How much?" she said to Dunmore, not moving from the line of fire. "The fund. What was raised? What reached the widows? You know the numbers or you would not be here. Say them." £4,000 subscribed. His arm was beginning to drop from the weight of it. Not 40 shillings ever reached a single woman of the company. "I buried Tom Skelton's wife in February. Parish coffin." "Then you are a witness," Clara said, "and a witness is worth more alive than a corpse is worth shot. Put it down, Sergeant. You have come to the one house in England where someone will believe you." She did not know if it was true. She made it true by saying it, the way she had made true a great many things in the last 6 months. The pistol came down. The valet had it a heartbeat later, and the footman had Dunmore's arms, and the man who had walked in to commit murder simply folded onto the cold marble and wept like a boy. "Take him to the steward's room and lock it," said Mr. Ferris, surging out from behind his pillar now that the danger was on the floor. "I'll send a man to the magistrate within the hour. Armed assault upon a peer. He'll hang by the assizes. And good riddance too. He'll go to the Green Chamber," the Duke said, "and he'll be fed." Ferris stopped as if struck. "Your Grace, the law is mine to invoke or not, in my own hall." The Duke had not raised his voice. Clara would learn, over the days that followed, that this was the dangerous register, that the Duke of Hartwell went quiet the way other men went loud. No one sends for the magistrate. No one sends for anyone. "Mr. Ferris, you will give me the ledger of the Hartwell relief subscription before supper. The ledgers are complex, Your Grace. They are not a thing to be before supper." For one moment, Something moved behind the steward's careful face. Not guilt, Clara thought, watching from the floor where she had sunk to her knees beside Dunmore. Calculation, the look of a man counting exits. Then it was gone, smoothed over, and he bowed, and the heavy ring of keys chimed at his belt as he went. The Duke crouched. He was a tall man, and it cost him something to come down to the marble, and Clara saw the scars on the backs of his hands up close. Not a gentleman's hands, a horseman's, a man who used them. He did not look at Dunmore. He looked at her. "You have ink on your fingers," he said. Clara's stomach dropped through the floor. "And you wear a Fusilier's button on a ribbon, and you knew his rank before he gave it." His brown eyes, the deep brown of strong tea, warmer than the rest of him allowed, moved over her face as though reading a letter in a hand he half recognized. "Who are you?" "Clara, your grace." "The third housemaid." "You are not," he said, "the third housemaid," and stood, and left her there with the weeping soldier and the dreadful certainty that 6 months of careful invisibility had ended on a wet afternoon in March. He sent for her at 9 that night. The library at Aldermere was the only warm room in a cold house, and the Duke stood at the long table with a single branch of candles and an open ledger. And he did not turn when she came in. "For 4 months," he said, "someone has been leaving me notes." Unsigned, a hand that disguises itself but cannot help its own neatness. The skeleton subscription is short. "Ask Ferris where the Michaelmas remittance went. The widows of the 52nd have had nothing. Verify it yourself." He turned a page. "I confess I took them for the work of a discontented clerk. I confess I did very little. And today a man I have wronged without knowing it put a pistol to my chest. And the only person in my household who moved to stop it was a housemaid who reads sergeant's buttons and writes a clerk's hand." Now he looked up. "I dislike being made a fool of in my own house. Clara, I have had a great deal of practice at it lately, and I find I have lost my taste for it. The notes are yours." It was not a question. She had spent 6 months preparing to deny it, and found, in the warm quiet of that room, that she could not be bothered to. "Yes," she said. "Why? Because I have written to your man of business 11 times as well." The words came out of her flat and old, worn smooth from handling. "Under another name." He answered twice. "The first letter told me the fund was administered to the satisfaction of the trustees. The second told me that if I persisted in slandering Mr. Silas Ferris, I would find the law was no friend to women of my station." She lifted her chin. "So I came to be of my station. It is astonishing, Your Grace, what a man will leave on his desk when the woman dusting it is invisible." Something crossed his face, not anger. The first crack of it. "You took a place in my house to spy upon my steward. I took a place in your house because no one above stairs would receive me to say what I am telling you now." Her voice shook, and she hated it. "You would not have seen me, Your Grace. A duke does not see the people who write him 11 letters. He sees the one who puts herself in front of a gun." The wound landed. She watched it land, watched the quiet man absorb it without flinching, and understood that she had hurt him precisely because it was true, and he knew it. "No," he said at last, very low. "He does not. That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in 5 years." He closed the ledger. "My brother raised the Hartwell Company. Henry, he died of a fever in the peninsula before he could come home to it, and I inherited his title and his debts and his guilt, and a steward who assured me, daily, that I need trouble myself with none of it. I let him. I was glad to let him." His jaw worked. "I have been the master of nothing in this house but my own grief. You came to expose Ferris. So did the man with the gun. It seems I am the last to arrive at my own ruin. Then stop standing at the back of the room, Clara said, and help me. They worked through 3 nights, and on the second the house showed them what it had been hiding. It was Clara who found it, because Clara knew where a careful man keeps the thing he must not lose. The estate post came to the steward's room and was sorted there before it ever reached the family. Every letter into Aldemir, every letter out, passing first under Silas Ferris's dry hands. She showed the Duke the franking marks, the little discrepancies in the dates. The way a letter posted in Lisbon might take 9 weeks to cross 30 feet of corridor and arrive, if it arrived at all, with its seal a hair's breadth wrong. "He reads everything," she said. They were bent together over the long table, close enough that she could smell cedar and candle smoke off his coat, close enough that she had to keep her eyes on the paper. 11 letters to a duke, Your Grace, and you never saw one. Because they never reached you. He has been your eyes and your ears and your hands, and you let him be your conscience too. And a man who controls the post controls the truth. The Duke was very still beside her. Then the warnings you left, under your door at night. The only door in the house his keys do not open. She managed a thin smile. A housemaid goes everywhere. It is the one freedom of the place. He picked up the brass button where it had slipped from her collar to lie on the ledger between them. He did not pull the ribbon, he simply touched it, turned it so the candlelight ran along the worn regimental crest. 52nd, he said. Henry's company. Whose was this? The question she had not let anyone ask in 6 months. My father's. Captain Edmund Hale. She made herself say the rest before her courage failed. He served under your brother. He died of the same fever, 3 weeks after Henry, and the fund your brother raised was meant for women exactly like my mother, and not 40 shillings of it ever reached her. And she is in a parish grave in Hampshire, because Silas Ferris needed £4,000 to cover a speculation in funds that went to nothing. The words were coming fast now, unstoppable. I am not a housemaid, Your Grace. I am the daughter of a captain who died believing his duke would keep faith with his men, and the man who broke that faith sleeps under your roof and eats off your plate and signs your name. The candle guttered. For a long moment the Duke of Hartwell said nothing at all, and when he spoke his voice had gone to the quiet, terrible register, and Clara understood it was not aimed at her. I am sorry, he said, for your father, for your mother, for every letter I did not read, because reading them would have asked something of me. I am more sorry then, Your Grace. Clara put her hand flat on the ledger. Stop apologizing. The dead are not owed your sorrow. Tell me what you mean to do. He looked at her then as though she had reached into his chest and turned something that had been seized for years. I mean, he said slowly, to do exactly as you tell me. God help us both. It was nearly midnight when they found the strongbox listed in Ferris's own inventory, Hartwell papers, sundry, and could not open it, and stood too close in the dark steward's room, with one candle between them and the knowledge of what would be inside. There will be letters, Clara whispered. He keeps what he intercepts. He is too careful to burn evidence he might one day need against the people he has cheated. Her hand had found the button again. My father wrote to us. From the peninsula. After Mother's last letter to him there was nothing, ever, not even word of his death. It came from the regiment, not from him. I always thought he had no time to write. But he would have written. He always wrote. Her throat closed. It may be in there. The last thing he ever said to me. 30 feet from where I have slept for 6 months. Clara, the Duke had turned to face her, and the single flame put gold along the white scar through his brow. And his scarred horseman's hand had come up as if to touch her face, and stopped, hovering, a half-inch from her cheek, close enough that she felt the warmth of it. If it is in there, I will put it in your hands myself, I swear it on a thing I have not believed in for 5 years. On what? On meaning to be worth the faith your father kept. The half-inch between his palm and her cheek became the whole world. She had only to lean. He had only to close the distance, and every rule that had governed her since she was a child in a captain's parlour, every protocol of rank and station, and the unbridgeable gulf between a duke and a dusting girl, stood in that half-inch and dared them. The door latch rattled. They were apart before it opened, the Duke at the window, Clara at the shelf with a rag in her hand, and it was only Mrs. Pruitt, the housekeeper, with a lamp and a face that knew far too much. "Begging pardon, Your Grace," the old woman said, and her eyes went from him to Clara to the strong-box and back, and she did not look surprised at any of it. "Mr. Ferris has called for the under-coachman to ready the gig at first light. He says he's for the county town on business." A pause. "He's never once gone to the county town in 12 years, Your Grace. I thought you'd want to know." The Duke and Clara looked at each other across the dark room. "He's running," Clara said. "He did not run, he did something worse, because Silas Ferris was a man who knew that a guilty flight confesses and an attack accuses. By morning the house was loud with it. The good silver was short, a salt cellar, a pair of candlesticks, and they were found, before the assembled staff, wrapped in a shift in the third housemaid's box beneath her bed, along with a letter in Clara's own neat clerk's hand, promising a fence in Portsmouth, a fair price for what comes out of the great house. It was a forgery, and a clever one. She had taught the hand to too many pages of her own warnings, and Ferris had studied them all. "There," said Ferris, and for the first time in 6 months he looked at Clara directly, and let her see the contempt beneath the dryness. "A creature who came into this house under a false history, who has wormed her way into your Grace's particular notice these 3 nights past, and a thief. I have served the Hartwell name 20 years. I will not stand silent while a gutter-bred adventuress robs it and slanders the man who keeps its books." He turned to the Duke, and his voice took on a velvet sorrow. "I know your Grace has been distracted of late. Grief is a long road. But I beg you see this woman for what she is before the county does it for you. It was beautifully done." Clara watched the footmen's faces close against her, watched even Mrs. Pruitt's mouth tighten with doubt, and felt the trap shut. She could accuse Ferris of the fund, and every word would now sound like a thief's desperate slander. He had not needed to disprove her. He had only needed to make her unbelievable. And it had worked. She could see it working. She could see in the Duke's still face that even he— "Send for the magistrate," the Duke said. The room exhaled. Ferris allowed himself the smallest bow. "Wisdom at last. For you, Mr. Ferris." The Duke had not moved from the foot of the stairs, and his voice had gone to the quiet register, and the whole hall went cold with it. "Tomorrow, at the county sessions, you will produce the relief ledger I asked of you 3 days ago, and have not received, and before the magistrate and the assembled gentlemen of this county, this woman, whose name is Clara Hale, daughter of Captain Edmund Hale of the 52nd, a gentleman who died in my brother's service, will answer your charge of theft, and you will answer hers." He came down the last stair. "She has my full protection in it, as will the lady who is to be my wife." The hall did not breathe at all. "Your Grace cannot mean," Ferris began. "By special license," the Duke said. "I sent to the Archbishop yesterday. We are married within the week." He looked at Clara across the stunned and silent room, and there was nothing of the cold man in it now, only the soldier's son who had finally walked to the front of the hall. If she will have a man who took 5 years to read his letters. The cost came that night, as Clara had known it would. Because Silas Ferris had one move left, and a clever man saves the cruelest for last. She was alone in the green chamber wing. They had given her a proper room, and a maid of her own, and the strangeness of being waited upon had not stopped feeling like a costume. When Mrs. Pruitt came at a run, lamp swinging. "He's taken the soldier." The housekeeper was white. "Mr. Ferris and 2 men from the village. They've taken Sergeant Dunmore out of the Green Chamber not a quarter-hour past. Said it was the Duke's order to remove him to the lock-up before the sessions, and your Grace asleep and not to be woken." She gripped Clara's arm. "Miss, a man can hang himself in a lock-up by morning, and no one the wiser, and a dead witness can't speak to any fund." Clara was already pulling her cloak from the door. "The strong box," she said. "Mrs. Pruitt, wake the Duke, tell him everything, and bring me the under-coachman and a crowbar. Ferris means to silence Dunmore and burn the papers both before the sun's up, and he cannot be in 2 places at once." Her hands were steady now. They were always steady when there was arithmetic to do. "He has chosen the soldier. So I will take the papers. You'll go to the steward's room alone, in the dark, with that man's men about the house. My father wrote me a letter," Clara said, "and that man has kept it from me for 3 years, and I am done waiting on the front of the room for someone else to bring it. Wake the Duke. Tell him where I am." And she went down into the dark house alone, toward 30 feet of corridor she had crossed 1,000 times with a duster in her hand, to take back the truth with a crowbar. The crowbar took the strong box in 4 blows, and the candle showed her everything at once. The relief ledger, double kept, the true account beside the false. In Ferris's own meticulous hand, every shilling of the 4,000 traced from the widow's need into a speculation in consols that had failed in the autumn of 1814. Bank drafts, a letter from the failed broker, and beneath them, tied in faded tape, a bundle of letters that had never been delivered, to a Mrs. Hale of Alton, Hampshire, 11 of them, and to others, and one in a hand she would have known blind, the ink browned, the seal lifted and pressed again by a careful thumb 3 years before. She did not read it then. There was no time, and besides, some things must be read in the light. She put her father's last letter inside her bodice against her heart, and she gathered the ledger and the drafts into her cloak, and when she turned, Silas Ferris was standing in the doorway with the pistol Dunmore had dropped, and behind him the grey of dawn had begun at the windows. "You are a great deal of trouble," he said, "for a captain's daughter," and the dry voice did not shake at all, and Clara understood that this man would kill her over an account book as simply as he had let her mother die over one. "You stole from widows to cover a bad gamble," she said. "Keep him talking. The sun was coming. The Duke was coming. £4,000. That is the whole of it. Not malice. Not even greed, in the end. A man who guessed wrong about the funds and spent 5 years burying the proof under coffins. And you would have me hang for arithmetic." He cocked it. "I think not. You'll hang for murder," said the Duke of Hartwell from the dark behind him. "If you so much as bruise her," and Silas Ferris made the last mistake of a careful life, which was to turn his head. It was enough. Clara did not wait for a man to save her. She had never in her life had that luxury, and she did not reach for it now. She brought the iron crowbar down on the wrist that held the gun, with the whole arithmetic of 6 months of buried rage behind it. And the pistol fired into the floorboards and skidded away. And then the Duke had Ferris against the wall by the throat. And the house was waking, and lamps were coming, and it was over before the steward had finished crying out. The Duke held him there a long moment, the quiet register entirely gone, his scarred hands shaking with something he had kept caged for 5 years. Then he let go. "No," he said, to himself as much as to Clara. "Not here. Not in the dark. You said it yourself. He looked at her, breathing hard, the dawn behind him. In front of the county. Let them all see. The county sessions met at 10, and the gentleman of the bench had come expecting a vagrant soldier and a thieving servant, and got, instead, a reckoning. The magistrate was Sir Hugh Tarrant, a stout fair man who had known the Duke's brother, and he sat behind the long table of the assembly room with the assembled gentry filling the benches behind, drawn by the impossible rumour that the Duke of Hartwell meant to marry his own housemaid. They had come to sneer. Clara stood before them in a plain grey gown that was still, beneath everything, a maid's, and she did not let them see her hands. It was the Duke's right to speak. The whole architecture of that room expected him to speak, the man, the peer, the rank that filled the doorway. He stepped forward to the table. And then he stopped and turned and said, "Miss Hale will lay the matter before the bench. She knows it better than any man living." A murmur went through the benches. Sir Hugh's brows rose, and Clara walked to the table with the double ledger in her arms and laid the truth down in front of the county that had come to laugh at her. She did it with numbers, because numbers cannot be called slander. £4,000 subscribed. She opened the true account beside the false, and let Sir Hugh's own finger trace the columns. The broker's letter, the bank drafts, dated named, the 11 undelivered letters to her mother, the franking marks, the lifted seals. And then she turned to where Silas Ferris stood between two constables, and she said the thing the whole room felt the floor tilt beneath. "You wrote to me, sir, that the law was no friend to women of my station." Her voice did not rise. She had learned the quiet register from a master. "You were correct that I had no friend. You were wrong about the law. Here is your hand, and here is your gamble, and here are the women you buried to cover it. And my mother's name is Margaret Hale, and you will say it to this bench before they take you out of this room. Because she was a person, and you let her die in a parish coffin for £4,000, and I have waited 3 years to make a gentleman of England hear her name." Silas Ferris said nothing, but the room had turned. She felt it turn, the way she had felt it turn against her the day before. Only now it ran the other way. A tide of well-bred outrage, breaking over a steward who had cheated soldiers' widows. Sir Hugh was already calling for the man to be held for the assizes. Sergeant Dunmore, fetched back at dawn, gaunt and shaking and alive, wept openly on the witness bench. And the Duke of Hartwell stood 3 feet behind Clara with his scarred hands at his sides, and did not say a single word, because he had understood, at last, what his part in it was. His part was to watch her do it. When it was done, when Ferris had been taken out, and the gentlemen were on their feet, and the noise of it filled the room, Clara turned and found the Duke looking at her as though she were the only fixed point in a moving world. "You did not need me at all," he said. "No," she said, and felt it stop being an accusation as she said it, and become something else. "But I should like to have you anyway." Nathaniel, it was the first time she had used his name. She watched it land on him like a thunderclap, watched 5 years of cold come apart in a single instant, and then he had crossed the 3 feet between them. The last distance, the one neither of them had been able to close in the dark, and he kissed her in front of the assembled county of Hampshire, a duke and a captain's daughter. Every rule in the room broken at once, and not one soul in it dared object. "Margaret," he said against her hair, when he could speak. "Your mother. I will put her name on a stone. A proper one. I swear it." "I know," Clara said, holding the brass button at her throat in one hand and the front of his coat in the other. "I knew you'd come. They were married, as the title of every piece of county gossip for a 12-month would insist, before the week was out, by special license, in the small church at Aldermere, with Mrs. Pruitt weeping into her best handkerchief and Sergeant Dunmore standing up as the only man Clara would have to give her away. Because, she said, he had served her father, and that was family enough. A year later, on a bright cold morning, Clara sat at the long library table that had once held a single branch of candles and now held a great deal of light, and read her father's letter for the 11th time. It was a short letter. He had been tired when he wrote it, and the fever was already in him, though he had not said so. He wrote that he was proud of her clever head and her stubborn heart. He wrote that she was to take care of her mother, and to remember that courage was not the absence of fear, but the decision made inside it. He wrote that he was sending home his coat button, the regimental one, because a man liked to think a piece of him would come home even if the rest of him could not. She had worn it on a blue ribbon for 3 years without knowing he had sent it deliberately. Ferris had let the coat through and kept the letter. The truth had come to her in 2 halves, 3 years apart. The button sat now on the mantel in a small frame, beside a miniature of a woman named Margaret Hale, whose grave, in Hampshire, had a proper stone. Silas Ferris had been convicted at the assizes and transported to New South Wales, where, the last anyone heard, he kept accounts for the colony and was very careful with them. The Hartwell Relief Fund had been made whole out of the Duke's own pocket, and a great deal more besides. Sergeant Dunmore administered it now, and there were no more parish coffins among the widows of the 52nd. The door opened. The Duke of Hartwell came in with rain in his dark hair, and the particular look he wore only in this room, where the cold man had first begun to thaw. "You're reading it again," Nathaniel said. "I am allowed." She did not look up. I waited a long time. He came and stood behind her chair and put his scarred hands on her shoulders, and they stayed like that a while, the two of them, in the warm room, the rain ticking on the high windows exactly as it had on the afternoon a housemaid had stepped off the wall and into the line of a gun. "Do you know," he said, "I still do not understand what made you move that day. Any sensible person would have stood still." Clara folded her father's letter along its old soft creases and set it down, and reached up to cover one of his hands with her own. "Courage isn't the absence of fear," she said. "It's only what you decide inside it." She turned in the chair to look up at him. "I had decided a long time before I ever saw you, Nathaniel. You were simply standing where I was already going.